The brain, in general, processes about 11 million bits of data per second.
What is the difference between the mind and the brain?
The primary function of the brain, Aubrey, is actually to keep us alive. The subconscious mind is about pattern recognition.
Are we taught how to make decisions? Are we taught how to think? Or is that something that happens automotively, like breathing?
If pain is not transformed, it's transmitted. Now, you would think that having grown up in a country that is so violent against people of color, they would know better.
Are you saying to me that we have destructive behavior?
So the software, the thoughts that runs our brain, is not updated to see a difference in opinion, a conflict, as anything different from, am I going to survive this?
Can black people be racist?
The thing about being human,
this conversation is about the choices we think we make and the ones that quietly make us. Inspired by the work of Dr. Matlhgonolo Malebane, a gynecologist and an executive coach with special interests in human cognitive process models. We're looking at the often unconscious ways we decide and how those patterns can tilt outcomes towards justice or quietly away from it. This is Unfiltered with me, Aubrey Masango, and in this episode, we'll unpack the mental shortcuts that keep life moving and how they can also hard-code bias into everyday decisions. How stress and social pressure reshape our judgment without asking permission, and what it takes to notice that shift in real life. Why neutral systems are rarely neutral. The role of defaults, forms, cues, and practical interrupts, better questions, small design tweaks that make fairer choices more likely at home, at work, and in power. Exploring how we can move from good intentions to better mechanisms, so fairness becomes a habit, not just a headline. If you've ever wondered why smart people, good people, still miss the mark, and how to do better starting this week, stay with us. By the end of this hour, you'll have a clearer map of your own decision-making and a toolkit to steer it. Dr. Malebane, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I want to start off by asking you, what is thinking and what is the value of it?
Brother, thank you very much for inviting me. I myself am looking forward to the infotainment. So I'm going to learn just as much and have as much fun, right?
Sure, absolutely.
This is it.
If a conversation is not fun, then it shouldn't be had.
I'm at the right place.
Yeah.
Okay. So thinking is a process that the brain engages in when it takes stimulus and tries to solve a particular problem. So for instance, if you're hungry, the brain determines, that we'll less on nutrients, glucose, right? Then let's create the feeling of hunger, right? But you walk in and you see that somebody's collapsed in a hospital. It's the thinking that's going to make you say, let me do something about it. So it's the abstract bit that actually determines what we see concretely as behavior or even talk.
You say that it happens in the brain. What is the difference between the mind and the brain?
Interesting. So the brain is an organ. The mind is the functional bit. The brain is a bicycle. Riding is the mind. It's the function of the brain.
Right. The conversation that I'm hoping we have today, I hope leads us to understanding how we make decisions. What kinds of thoughts we have that lead us to making decisions, and I suppose for the purpose of solving problems. But I want to understand the nature of the process of decision-making. What is decision-making? I imagine it is part of thinking, but it sounds or feels intuitively to me like it's something that is a lot more definitive. Talk to me about that. What is decision-making?
So decision-making is evaluation of data with a particular end goal in mind, and then trying to figure out, with available sets of facts, what would be the most appropriate action or thing to say or do.
Are we taught how to make decisions? Are we taught how to think? Or is that something that happens automotively, like breathing?
It is automotive. The brain, in general, processes about 11 million bits of data per second, right? The active part of the brain we call the consciousness, where you and I are engaging in a conscious conversation, the conscious mind, that handles about 40 bits. So the question then is, what happens to the 11,999,060 bits? And this is really where I think our conversation is leading, is when you say decision making, how much of it is upset and reflected and learned lessons? Or, well, I'm actually making decisions as I always did.
So the lion that's walking around in the savannah, is it thinking about how to hunt? Is it a cognitive process, as you've described it, to hunt strategically? Is it engaged in strategic cognitive processes, the lion?
So there are two parts to this question, Robert. One is instinct. If the lion is hungry, it will have the propensity to want to fulfill their hunger, right? So it's a physiological need, right? Now, to think, how am I going to go about it? That's the strategic part. Right? This is why you'll see lions will hunt in a formation.
Yes.
So it's the conscious thing riding on instinct. So it's a combination of both, in essence.
And is that the same in human beings?
It is the same in human beings. If you look at evolutionary psychology or evolutionary biology, you spoke about the lion in the savannah. The primary function of the brain, Aubrey, is actually to keep us alive. Right? So it's survival. When we go back to that example of the lion, or a human being growing in, let's say a human being when we lived in the African savannah, if you had a noise in the bush, you had to decide, is it something that's going to eat me, or is it something innocuous?
Sure.
Like a rabbit or a lion,
Yeah.
right? If you make the wrong decision, you're going to be in trouble. You'll be eaten, right? So you and I are the progeny of the people who have, more often than not, thought this is something dangerous and therefore lived to reproduce. So it is that margin of error, right? So if you think it's nothing serious, but it is, you're toast. The reason I'm talking about this is we then understand that even though the environment today has become safer, our brain, so the software, the thoughts that runs our brain, is not updated to see a difference in opinion, a conflict, as anything different from, am I going to survive this?
So we are still running on the software that either made us survive or not survive a possible ambush by an animal that is carnivorous that would enjoy us as a bit of lunch.
Absolutely proper. This is why when you ask a lot of people what the brain's primary function is, they'll tell you that it's to make decisions, it's intellectualize. But from what you've painted, you have to survive to intellectualize. If you're eating, there's no smartness about you. So that's it.
So the thinking process that belongs to the realm of awareness is informed by many, many experiences of reality that led to survival.
100%.
Is that what you're saying to me?
100% probably. 100%.
Doc, the reason why I'm asking these questions is because in a world that has the technological advancements that we have, in a world where we understand how to bring more yield out of the ground in terms of vegetation and food. In a world where sociology and philosophy and psychology tells us what are the criminally insane things that we've done historically as mankind, we seem to be continuing to make the same mistakes over and over again. Why, if the theory is that in order for us to survive, we've got to make decisions that will lead us to survival, why is it that mankind continuously makes decisions that are detrimental to his very existence? And I'm talking about the wars that we see, how we vote, how we decide to have families. We constantly are making decisions that are detrimental to our very existence. Why?
There are two things to consider. One is, we've said that for the biggest part, our lives are run by the subconscious mind. If we were to think everything through, almost like learn everything from scratch. So imagine that you wake up every day, you have to learn how to walk, how to talk. You just have what we call cognitive overload. Your brain will just shut. So to help us get by, the brain takes things that we do regularly and automates them. However, because those come naturally, we are born with a self-serving need to survive. Children are classically egocentric. They want that which will help them stay alive. But look, as people grow older, we then extend that into what we call sociocentrism. So I start with what's good for me. But when I'm a little bit older, I see the people that look like me, that speak like me, and I then not only privilege what I want, but also want to privilege what the group wants. Unless we learn the elements of critical thinking, we will continue to do exactly the same things that we've done. So the standard is, let's continue as it is, but if you want an awakening, well, that has to be done actively.
So you're saying to me that things like traditions and customs, habits at an individual level are the things that we have automated.
Correct.
Things that we have relegated to simply just doing without necessarily thinking.
Absolutely.
Are you saying to me that we have automated destructive behavior?
So we've automated behavior that just happens to be destructive.
Okay.
The way to think about it, perhaps, is the subconscious mind is about pattern recognition. As much as we think that when I make a decision, I am thinking about these facts that are here at the moment. But actually, a lot of it probably is recalling. What your brain does, if we're in a situation of conflict, your brain recalls, what did I do the last time I was in this environment? So it looks at the context and say, what's the best thing to do? And so as I say, we cultivate this. In fact, not even cultivate, it's actually natural to have the self-serving behavior. The only way out is to stop and reflect. All the things that you talk about, whether it is culture, it is law, it is anything else that is regimented, does it still serve us? And if it serves us, it means we've reflected on it and said, that's fine, that's what we should do. The biggest problem, Aubrey, is that it takes a lot to actually engage conscious thinking. A simple example is when you look at the conscious brain and the subconscious brain is an iceberg. What you see on top there is what is conscious. The massive bit is behind us. So even when you make a decision, well, a lot of it is actually has been made for you. I think an even better example to illustrate this is to think of the subconscious mind as an elephant. And then think of the conscious mind as an ant riding on this elephant. Now, the ant can say, hey, I want to turn around. But if the elephant is pointing that direction, that's where we're going to go.
I had a conversation with a woman who happens to be in a very abusive relationship with her husband. And she asked me, she said, how can we make him stop? How can we make my husband stop beating me? And it turned out that the man has been beating her even before they got married, and they've been married for years. And I thought to myself, is it even possible for this guy to stop beating her? And I said, have you ever had a conversation with him about this? He says, no, he doesn't listen. And I said, have you thought about your own safety and your physical safety? He says, I have, but you know, the children, I've got to stay for the children. And I said, has it ever occurred to you that maybe you need to leave this relationship in order for your children to be safe, you to be safe? She said, no, I can't do that. And what I realized is that there are patterns of thought that we have adopted that keep us in places of harm. Talk to me about this woman and what seems to be an incarceration of her own thinking, that she's incarcerated by her own thinking to stay in harm's way. Talk to me about that. Why doesn't she leave? Now, I understand that there are probably economic considerations, and there are maybe even cultural and religious considerations. But surely there comes a time when you've got to think in terms of, how do I survive here? Because ultimately this guy will kill me. And I'm told that he also turns on his children sometimes and beats the children. But it hasn't occurred to her that it is a real option for her to leave. Why?
And you know, probably not having spoken to this woman and the man, we can only speculate. But part of what is going on here probably is the distinction between thoughts and emotions. It really does not exist. These are intertwined. When we make a choice to enjoy a drink, right, and we enjoy it, whether it's in the cool summer, ice cream, whatever it is, there's an emotion that comes with it. So even when I think, part of my thoughts are, in that particular context, include emotions. So I imagine that in this situation, at a rational level, she is aware. There is just no way that she's not aware of the dangers. Part of the reason that she might be staying is she is invested in this relationship. She's invested emotionally. But also, there might be something that she sees in this man that, minus the abuse, this is the person that I can stay with. It may also be that she thinks there's probably a way that this gentleman can be helped. And I don't fault her for it. Because what this gentleman is demonstrating, or also the lady is demonstrating, is just running on the scripts, running on those patterns. What we really then need to try and understand from a coaching perspective is, how is this behavior serving this gentleman? How is it serving him? Also, what's behind it? Right. So the one is judge him from his conduct, but perhaps the call from an ethical point of view is, what's going on with him? Because if he can be helped, and I say helped, he can be helped in inverted commas, because nobody changes for somebody else. It has to cost him something. Only then will he change. But when he changes for himself and becomes somebody who's not abusive, that's the ideal man that we want.
But where's love there? I mean, don't people do things because they love other people? Or are you saying to me that even the notion of love is a self-serving notion? So we love because it serves us. It's not this magnanimous idea of I'm doing it for the other person. Even though I say that I love you, it's still for me. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely the point, Abu Dhabi. She's staying there because there's something in it for her. This is why if she does leave, it is probably very difficult to talk her back to it, right? Because then she's lost the value that she found in that. So she's staying there for selfish reasons in a cognitive sense, right? But a lot of it, from my understanding, is that it's subconscious. There is something that both of them are not dealing with that's keeping them in this.
What about the injuries, man? What about the beatings, the humiliation in society, the noise, the fact that people know that, that couple is at it again? Shouldn't that be enough incentive for somebody to make a decision that is self-preservatory, if the logic that you've been expressing is anything to go about? Why doesn't she look for a way by which she will feel some sort of safety? Or are you saying to me that even in that abuse, there is some strange, maybe strange to me, but there is a real sense of safety in that relationship that serves her at some strange level?
So one of the things that you spoke about probably is that when you think about thoughts and behavior, some of it is the scripts that we've been handed. Is it possible that she's staying in that relationship because society has made her think that if you go, you're a loser? That if you go, you're abandoning yourself. So it's one thing for her to see herself walk away from this man, but what if part of it is actually this is how she sees herself? She's a married person with children, and her value of success, part of it may very well be holding down a marriage and believing that something will work out here.
A lot of what you're saying is probably very true, because even customarily you'll know that when the elders are admonishing, counseling a couple, part of what is said is that the success of a woman is to stay in her marriage. It's to begezela mtanam. It's to, we even have sayings in our native language that says, a great woman is the woman that holds the knife on the sharp end. Yeah. A little perverted, because I'm told that the original saying is that a mother, a good mother, is the one who holds the knife on the sharp end. But that's, I suppose, the semantics that we could debate. But what you're saying to me is that there are certain values that are inculcated by many women that give them a sense of status, of value, that come from the idea that you must endure even some of these hardships?
What I'm saying, bro, is how we think of ourselves is both a function of what we've learned, but also part of what we want for ourselves. So in this particular scenario, patriarchy, I mean, we live in a patriarchal society. Patriarchy may be informing the husband, the way you show love is through abuse. But it may very well be that wherever this gentleman has grown up in that family, that is how communication, or that is one form of communication. Because it's very strange that you say to somebody, I love you, but you beat them. And it may very well be that the lady might have grown up in a similar environment, so that for her, part of confirming affection is actually physical abuse. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, I remember when we were growing up, some ladies would say, if I'm sharp, I'm right.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I went to go and speak, because I do a little bit of speaking, and right. I went to go and speak to some high school students. Right. And the conversation got to the point where we were just having banter. And I can't remember what the circumstances were. And this young girl said, no, if he doesn't beat me, then it means that he doesn't love me. And it's a deeply entrenched way of thinking. So I hear you.
And the point I'm making here is, even though she might be the one articulating that, is it possible that it's a society that is speaking through her? Mm. Is this how she's been brought up that eventually we've normalized abuse. I mean, another example probably that I saw the other day on television is the bodyguards of the deputy president assaulting another group of gentlemen. Now, you would think that having grown up in a country that is so violent against people of color, they would know better. But it turns out, if pain is not transformed, it's transmitted. So if we have not metabolized that pain and bring something nutritious, we're simply going to be repeating the script.
One of the big current affairs conversations at the moment is what's going on in Gaza, Palestine. And on another platform, somebody brought about the conversation that says, the people who understand genocide, the people who were almost wiped out by a maniac by the name of Adolf Hitler, should be the ones that understand the realities and ramifications of ethnic cleansing. And yet what we see in Gaza is a direct contravention of that fundamental principle that those who know the pain should not inflict it. You saying that that's not always going to be the case?
I'm saying that probably because we go back to the arbitrary division between conscious thought and subconscious thought. The subconscious mind doesn't decide, it doesn't make value judgments. If you perform a behavior over and over and over again, it becomes automated. At that point, you are just going to repeat it given the contextual clues. So for instance, if every time I go home, I go past a fast food restaurant and I stop by and eat, I have to do it a couple of times. But at some stage, without consciously thinking about it, I'm just going to find myself driving that way. The only way to interrupt this, Brother Aubrey, is to question that the very actions that we're perpetrating that have been hurting us, and we're now using to hurt other people, how do they elevate humanity? And I think from my point of view, this is really the value of ethics. Ethics helps you to answer one question. Does my conduct promote the well-being of others? So actions that promote the well-being of others are morally praiseworthy. These are good moral actions. The actions that harm or devalue the well-being of others, those are unethical things. And the only way, from my point of view, is to then engage in critical thinking. But that can only happen probably if you interrupt, reflect, and then make a decision. The way that I'm going to act in a relationship, in a conversation, is that going to uphold somebody's well-being? Because I can tell you probably, this conversation will end. You'll walk and I'll walk away. The question is, do you leave me better or do I leave you better? The only way to do the problem is the awakening to engage that part of the brain that is known as the prefrontal cortex, the executive thinking.
I want to go to that, but I want to perhaps ask it by way of this question, because I do want to understand what you call the ethical mind. What kicks that off? Is that something that happens automatically, or is it something that one has to consciously and through effort engage in? Inspired by what? But I'm going to ask you what might sound like a provocative question. Can black people be racist?
So this depends on how you define racism. Right? You can define racism as a structural or systemic thing, where there's a racial hierarchy. Its primary function is just inequitable distribution of resources. But then you can also define it as prejudice. Right? So at a systemic level, people of color don't have the systemic power, because it takes a lot of financial power to really be able to have your way with people. But can you be prejudicial against somebody else? Oh, absolutely. That's a matter of value. That's a matter of seeing somebody's packaging and then assigning to them certain attributes that you can't really work out just by looking at them.
So
Same
are
thing
you
with
saying
sexism.
to me that black people can see themselves as better than people of other races? Without the conversation about resources, is it possible for those that were oppressed under systems such as apartheid,
Right.
imperialism, colonialism, to see themselves as superior beings to those that have oppressed them?
It is possible, Aubrey.
I asked this, Doc, and indulge me a little bit.
Sure.
That the systemic resource racism that needs resources, power and money, is fundamentally fueled by the sense that I'm superior.
Yes.
Right? I'm better than you. That's why we have terms such as white supremacy. That prejudice, that fundamental prejudice, without the allocation of resources, is the kernel, is the seed of what then manifests into structural racial division of resources, which is the manifested racism. But in order for that to happen, the unmanifested, unseen racism has got to be in there, right? Can those who don't have the resources have that thing in them?
Precisely, probably. Here's the way to think about it. We make a distinction between whiteism and white people. Whiteism is a frame of mind. Right? It is that which structures society based on some arbitrary hierarchy. One of it could be gender. One of it could be the ethnic group. But it infiltrates everybody. I mean, that's how pervasive the system is. Right? It infiltrates everybody.
So you're saying to me that even black people can be possessed of whiteism?
Absolutely.
Wow.
None of us are immune of whiteism, which is why the importance of distinguishing between the ethnic group that's known as white from the system of whiteism is to then, for you to have empathy with a white person who says, this African person is being racist against me. Precisely because what they're saying is, we have been so indoctrinated that we've even absorbed this. So on the one person, if you're a man, because of patriarchy, you feel a sense of superiority, right? But I mean, all it is just a biological difference, right? Then when it comes to racism and prejudice, what I'm saying is, if you accept that racism is so perverse and whiteism is so perverse that white people and people of color can actually be victims of the system, you will then get to a point where just because somebody is white or Asian, you will not necessarily attribute to them racism. But when they manifest those, you'll then be able to understand that it is probably more likely that somebody who feels superior can actually look down upon somebody else. You will have instances where even amongst people of color, right, even amongst people of the same ethnic group with maybe different tribes, that there can also be this manufactured sense of superiority and inferiority.
I suppose the conversation around racism or any ism, any prejudice that has gotten a name, whether it's racism, whether it's sexism, ageism, whatever the case may be, the same types of thought patterns are prevalent in them. Would that be true?
Correct. So here's the thing, and let's stick with racism for a bit. What whiteism really wants to achieve is to think of...
By the way, is there a blackism?
I suppose there would be a blackism, and blackism, I imagine now that you ask, would be just absorbing the inferiority. So while Whiteism says the society is going to be structured by some, let's say, using the color of the skin, right? Because that's what racism is, in essence, right? And maybe before we say that, probably, let's say this, that race does not exist in biology. Right? Race does not exist in nature. When you look at
the social construct.
It is a social construct. So when you look at the genetic makeup of people, you're actually going to find within ethnic groups a greater variety, genetic variety, than you'll find between racial groups or ethnic groups. Right? So what Whiteism does is, by structuring its sole purpose, as I said, is inequitable distribution. So what it would have been preferable, and you'll see this in what we call pseudoscientific writing, would have been that human beings belong to different species. But because that just does not happen, the next level is to actually just look at the color of the skin. Because if we were able to say people of African descent, Asian descent belong to a different species, well, then we'd be absolutely justified to treat them that way, just like we justify to treat animals badly because we say that they're not human beings. The reason you need that is if you see them as the same species as yourself, you are then going to experience what we call cognitive dissonance. How do I, if you look like me, you are like me, treat you differently? So the way to justify it is downgrade them. Then you can treat them the way you want. Then you can treat people of LGBTQI+ the way you want, because they're not authentically human. Then you can treat people with disabilities. Then you can treat people that are older. Any difference, if you can exploit that, then it gives you a free check to treat people the way you want.
Where does prejudice come from? Whether it's racism, sexism, whatever, what system of thinking perpetuates that? And I want you to go to that primordial place where we did things because we wanted to survive. Explain to me the genesis, the origins of prejudice as a cognitive modality that persists even to this day in some of the most ironic spaces, where those who are victims of a form of prejudice become the worst enablers and enactors of that same prejudice, where women who are abused by certain men or victims of terror will go back to that terrorist. I think it's called the Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
The Stockholm syndrome. What is the primordial origin of that modality of thinking, of cognition?
Right. This takes us back, as you say, to the evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology. It is about difference. That animal that's going to eat me is different from me. Human beings will not do that to me. That's the primary thing. So what prejudice does is that it takes a natural phenomena, instinctive behavior, that looks at, if it's different from me, it's probably going to hurt me. It then applies it to human beings. If you're different from me by whatever, you speak a different language, you look differently, your weight is different from mine, your sexual orientation is different from mine, it exploits that. Because from the evolutionary biology, if it is different, it's probably going to harm me. So I'm going to do all that I can to defend myself. When you translate this into prejudice, it's exactly that. If it's different, because remember what we said at the beginning probably is that what we learn automatically is egocentrism as a little baby. But as we grow older, unless we question that what I want doesn't serve everybody, we then extend it to sociocentrism. So all the time we want to privilege those that look like us in a particular way, By the way, it should not surprise you that if you find a group of people that have something in common, bikers, right? They might click from, and bikers from a different racial group, they might click together better than people from a different. So let's say for instance, you have white bikers, and I really don't, I must tell you, I really don't like the racial classification of white, and because
it's not a real thing.
It's
a social construct.
It is a social construct, but more than anything else, probably, it takes away our humanity. But let's use the language that everybody will understand. I mean, this is the apartheid classification, right? Because I mean, we can go back to a time where some people are called Europeans and some are called Africans, but you'll see that all the time, it isn't the victims that choose the labeling, right? So for the sake of the conversation, we'll stick with the nomenclature that's understood. But the point I was making is, let's say you find bikers. Let's make it easy and take three of them. So a white fellow, a colored fellow, and an African fellow. Each of them might be able to be prejudicial or stand together with the person they share this particular activity with against somebody of the same ethnic group. So for me, I might stand against you. Because what we've done there probably is we've now created a tribe that is joined by a certain value. There is no othering anymore because we almost have become a homogeneous group. And this is the point I'm making, is once we have decided you are different, by whatever means, well, you know, we're coming
by whatever
for you.
Matrix, by whatever
for you.
whatever classification.
We're coming for you.
So you're saying to me that the primordial instinct for survival that came from saying that which does not look like me is probably going to kill me, has been imbibed so thoroughly and lives so deeply in the subconscious and is responsible, quite frankly, for our survival over time. And that is why it has, at least its building blocks have stayed and they've lived in our subconscious. But what has happened, if I understand you correctly, is that we've taken that instinct and applied it to even those who are part of our own species and created ideas of difference in order to activate actions of survival against what we would understand as other, as different from me.
And that's the basis of any type of prejudice probably, is you're different from me. I'm a heterosexual, able-bodied male. Anybody that doesn't look like me, from an instinctive point of view, is out here to hurt me. They're not part of my egocentrism, they're not part of my sociocentrism. If we walk away with that understanding that what prejudice does is it takes a natural phenomenon for survival, instinct, and corrupts it into prejudice.
The natural instinct for survival is based on a real threat. That animal has big teeth. It is going to come after me and kill me because I am food to it. What is the rationale of prejudice?
And that's exactly it, is difference. Anything that is different from me requires of me a lot to vet into it being okay for me, right? If I stick around the people that talk like me, that look like me, that think like me, the brain doesn't have to do a lot. It just has to cruise. When the brain has to think consciously, am I really holding a prejudiced view about a human being? It takes a lot of energy. So it's easier for us to just coast.
So what you're saying to me is prejudice is just laziness?
It's laziness. It is cognitive laziness. That's just what it is. Because, Aubrey, how is it that I can look at you just based on your physical characteristics and think that I can extrapolate that about you which is not seen? That if I see a person of Asian descent, right, and I can think, sure, they're probably shoddy, they have immoral attitudes, they have they have superior intellect, right? It is asking too much. It is asking too much. So the easiest thing to do is to simply just conform. Anything that looks different, we're coming for it. Which is what the one way out of this, Aubrey, is to actually look for people that share similar values with you, regardless of the ethnic group, regardless of the color of the skin. Because what you are then doing is walking away from just a simple reductionist, if this is how you look, those are your attributes.
Is it possible that those meta characteristics that I attach onto somebody simply because they are different from me can be informed by something that happened? So, for example, if I am a white suburban woman in South Africa somewhere who has been hijacked by a black man or black men, is it possible that prejudice can be enhanced by that episode? Is it possible that I, as a young woman, black woman, can see a bunch of guys, black guys, or even white guys, and immediately go into a panic, even before I've spoken to them, or even before they've seen me, because I once had a situation where I was violated by a man?
100%. Let's go back to the conversation where we talk about how quickly we form perceptions and judgments. What the brain does is recall what happened in a similar environment previously. So what the subconscious mind does is it recognizes pattern. It says, if this had happened to me, it was a group of men, and let's just say maybe African men, that hijacked me. You don't even have to think it automatically. And then this is precisely what survival is, right? Is that's different. What was my experience with it before? Automatically that jumps up. So people do not become prejudicial in the moment. It is the script. It is the social fabric that we've learned. I'll give you two examples.
Oh, so prejudice is learned.
Prejudice is learned. Prejudice is learned, probably.
You don't get born with it.
You don't get born with it, but how you learn it, by the way, is if you grow up in an environment where everything is the same, that people talk the same language, people look like you, right? Anything that doesn't look like you, this is really where the difference is, right? And the point I was trying to make is, let's look at two examples. I'll give you two examples. There's a story of Bishop Desmond Tutu getting into a plane from Nigeria, and then he hears the pilot speaking, and clearly from their accents, these are Africans. And he says he went into a panic. Really, tight chest, heart beating fast. And then
I think it was Nelson Mandela, actually.
So I read it. It could be, but yeah. I read the story about Desmond Tutu. But I mean,
anyway, it was one of those great luminaries, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what then he recognizes later is, geez, you know what? It is because the pilots I'm used to are generally of the white racial group, right? So just that. Now, here's what has happened, is that instinct has kicked in. This is not familiar. these are not the guys that have the intellect to fly this plane. It makes him anxious. But conscious thinking has helped him interrogate those facts, reflect on them and say, but these guys have gone to school. So these guys surely know what they're doing. It's not the color of their skin, it's their skill that matters. There's another example of, it was a reporter on ENCA, Lindsay Dinklinger. In a few of these interviews, it was during COVID, she interviews white and black politicians.
I remember, yeah.
And it happens at minimum twice. Now, here's the thing though, is that unlike the previous example, where in the moment, whether it's Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela, was actually able to reflect and say, hold on, what's going on here? The fact that with Lindsay Dinklinger, it happened on more than one occasion, doesn't necessarily make a racist, but it basically, and I mean, I suppose, that's to be for a different time. But what it tells us is she's operating from a script that she has learned. The invitation is not so much to blame her, but is that when she recognizes, just like it happened with one of the greats, is, hey.
Yeah, because she could write a book later on telling us of how she was rehabilitated from that kind of thinking, in the same way that Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela is writing about the fact that I had a prejudice towards a black pilot because they were black, because I had grown up in a particular way of thinking.
This is it.
You're suggesting that prejudice can therefore be unlearned.
I'm suggesting that prejudice can be unlearned, but more than anything else, I'm also saying that it's not helpful for judgment first, right? To call people sexist, racist, it helps us only to a point where we can confine them. The invitation is, can we kind of understand that maybe this person is just running through a program? Maybe this person is actually being run by what society has always taught them. Could we then invite them to a conversation where we say, how can you mitigate against hiring the people that look like you? How can you transform this society into a more equitable society? Part of it, Bra Aubrey, is going to take this critical consciousness. But it's also going to take, by the way, the thing that makes us uncomfortable is, one, having these conversations, but better still, having these conversations with people that don't look like you. Go to people that have a different opinion, even people that have a radically different opinion with yourself. Try and understand for a second, why would somebody who is intelligent hold the view that they do? And I think there are two things that will happen in that instance. One is that you then get what we call cognitive resonance. If I can understand how you think, I'm better able to understand you. But if I can understand how you think, it might also be an invitation for me to understand how you feel. So I'll develop cognitive resonance, but also develop empathic resonance. In that moment, I'm able to invite you in, more than just call you out and say, but do you recognize that that statement is sexist? It's hating other people. Because remember what we said about the ethical value is in deciding, does this conduct elevate another person's well-being? Does it promote one person's well-being? Or does it diminish? So in essence, what I'm saying, Brother Aubrey, is if we only stop at making judgments, we're not extracting maximum value. If we say that guy's just abusive, the example you spoke about, but if we can go behind what pains this guy, because if somebody is content and fulfilled, they would not express love through violence. What have they learned? And if we can find that switch and help them, and by the way, we also will recognize this probably, we don't change people's minds. We create an environment and provide data that make them change their mind, but you don't really change somebody's mind. I have my own frame. If you can bring to me, metaphorically, something that looks like my frame, and I can swap it for that, we're winning.
You make the emphasis on saying we have an opportunity in recognizing prejudice. we have an opportunity to also recognize something about ourselves when we call out that prejudice. What is it that could be behind the propensity to be in a position where I call you out and say, you are prejudiced, you are bad? What is behind this burden of certainty that I have in wanting to tell you that you are bad? Because some things in this conversation that you and I are having is suggesting that it's not just the prejudice of the racist or the sexist.
Of the perpetrator, yes.
Of the perpetrator.
Yeah.
But there's something also going on in the one that is calling it out. What's going on in the modality, in the cognition, in the psychology even, of the one that is calling the prejudice out?
So, one, Russia's indignation may be right. If somebody is raping somebody, absolutely. Right? Somebody is being racist, absolutely. Right? The invitation here probably is, we can come at it one of many ways. One is, as I say, I can call out. That's finger wagging. Or we can try and understand. This will also take us back to one of the conversations that you and I had, that when I said it's impossible to understand somebody and not to love them. And you very brilliantly said, not to know their opinion, your opinion about them, but to know them. So to answer your question, firstly, if I call somebody out, that's just a sense of gratitude, right? I mean, it's virtue signaling. I'm on a higher pedestal, and all of us really want the sense of being right. You caught that criminal. What I'm saying is,
but it concretizes, it solidifies your understanding of yourself as being the catcher of the criminal.
Oh, absolutely, morally upright.
It solidifies the idea that you are somehow superior.
Oh, absolutely.
It solidifies the idea that you are a little more astute than the criminal. It solidifies all sorts of ideas about how much you are better than that person. I want to make a quick reference to a story that is also current at the moment. The Minister of Arts and Sports, Mr. Gayton McKenzie, correctly points out the racist remarks of some young kids on a podcast.
Right.
I think it's Open Chat.
Open Chat,
correctly points it out.
Yeah.
But then goes further and says that I'm going to facilitate the cancellation of that podcast. I'm going to take those youngsters to the cleaners, legally and however. And what that does is that it precipitates another process where people start to actively look for incidents where he has made prejudiced comments about black people, for example, and such that he is now the perpetrator in the minds of many people. And of course, you understand the political conversation that's taking place in that situation. At the same time, there's another gentleman, another political player. I think his name is Fadil Jacobs. He is the leader of a party in Cape Town. I think it's called the Cape Coloured Congress or something of that nature. He then makes videos to say what those youngsters did and said was wrong. It was wrong. It was racist. It is something that we cannot tolerate. But we can't, he says, Fadil, I think it's Fadil Jacobs. I forget what his name is. But we can't then be calling for the cancellation or the taking to the cleaners of these youngsters. He says that. And in that same conversation, there is the conversation that says, but black people have been the ones that call people out. And suddenly it's them being called out. Now we are trying to pull out, or we're trying to cancel the one who called them out in the person of Gayton.
Gayton, yes.
And it's a whole mess. It's a whole hot mess of finger pointing that has ensued in all of this. And created further polarization.
Mm-hmm.
It is good and right, I would argue, to call out racism wherever it rears its ugly head. But our conversation seems to be suggesting that there's the calling out of racism or any prejudice in society in order to fix society, and there's the calling out of racism in order to grandstand, to peacock. Is that what you say?
It is precisely what I'm saying, probably. We have an opportunity to mine those situations for values. How can we move from here, right? But it also takes us back to what we coined Whiteism, right? That it's so pervasive that in the end, you're going to have to understand that.
And that is not a matter of pigmentation. It is
absolutely.
System, you say.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Somebody might ask you, why then call it Whiteism? Why don't you call it something else?
So we call it Whiteism because the genesis is actually been from white people.
Okay.
It is white people that have decided on a racial hierarchy, right? But we've got to say beyond that point, although we can say that it originated with white relation, and we said, we said its whole point was, if we can create subspecies, then we can keep the winnings for ourselves, and then we can exploit everybody else. Right? And we said it applies with sexism.
So if the aliens came, we could then create our own little...
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So to your point, we must absolutely call out behaviors that are diminishing the well-being of others, right? But in this particular instance, the three players, the open chat who made those racist remarks against people of colored descent, what Fadil is surfacing is absolutely incorrect. But if we cancel out everybody, if we lock up everybody, probably literally we'll have the whole population in prison, because none of us are devoid of prejudice, simply because that's the script we're handed: egocentrism, sociocentrism. Beyond that point is, if we understand that it's systems, then we are able to then say, just because you're white doesn't necessarily mean that you are prejudiced, that you're racist. That may be the inclination, that may be what is more likely going to happen with you. But from the grief, I think we should open the door for grace. An abusive man, if we then say, sure, it's causing us a lot of grief, grace probably is, can we try and understand what is behind this person? And what this will help us is to understand what the role of punishment is, right? Is it to rehabilitate people, or is it to banish them? Because when we answer that question, we are then able to take up the invitation of separating people from their behaviors. You're not a sum total of all your mistakes. But if we call somebody out, what you're doing, Aubrey, is you're creating that as an identity. Now, guilt is one thing, it is how I feel, but shame becomes an identity. When you put in that...
Let's say that again.
So guilt is an act that is how I feel, right? It's remorse for what I've done. I feel bad about it, right? But shame is an identity.
It's when you invest your identity into that guilt and you make it you.
You make it you.
Ooh.
Because then you close up. Then you're not able to open yourself up to the conversations. So if you say, as a white man, I am the descendant of racists, there's nothing I can do about it. By the way, feeling guilt and feeling shame isn't going to change the circumstances of the people that are prejudiced. What can we do together? How can we find value so that at the end of the day, We then live in Africa that, like Kwame Nkrumah says, you're not African because you're born in Africa. You're African because Africa is born in you. Right? So it's going to be our values. You and I are going to become friends, not because we look alike, but because we have the same values. But at the same time, we've got a whole space that even when people have transcended the sociocentric behaviors, if they trip up and make mistakes, we don't jump back and say, we knew it. You're a white person. Of course we're going to do that. It's to simply say, well, here's this episode. Let's do the next episode. So we should, nobody.
So we sort of wash ourselves of this over time.
But for me, love is the only language. For me, love is the only language. If I don't talk to you in a way that is loving, here's the invitation. I want you to see that the vessel of love is empty. Will you fill it in for me? But for you to do that, Aubrey, you've got to have a different lens, or you've got to have a different eye. But better still, you've got to have a different heart, a different mind. Because if you have the same, if I give you a new set of eyes connected to the same brain, you'll see exactly the same thing. So the invitation is go beyond the labeling, see the human being. And if we can validate a person's experience, because if you sit with an African man who says black women are taking our jobs,
or there's a white genocide.
Or there's a white genocide, right? You can appeal to them by using statistics. That's an intellectual debate, right? That's an intellectual argument that you're centering. But if they've had somebody killed in their family, if somebody in their own family has lost a job, that's their personal experience. You can't take that away from them. For me, separate those conversations. Have this emotional conversation where you say, you know, of course, I understand what your family has gone through, and I sympathize with you. I think it must be difficult to have somebody lose a job because I know that they are not able to fulfill their financial obligations. When you have settled that, something opens up in people because you see me. When you see me at a different time, because remember, this is a lifelong project, at a different time, I then can sit down with you and say, of course, but let's look at the stock exchange. Let's look at who lives in Alex. So unless we can go through that cognitive resonance and understand how a person thinks, we will not be able to get through the empathic resonance. But if we don't, we're not going to be able to have the conversation. Because an anxious mind is not a learning mind.
Unless we desist from one-upping one another, I think is what you're saying. Unless the conversation is about a genuine, authentic seeing of each other, then we will continue to be in the Olympics of pain.
Yes.
So the Afrikaner white community will say that we are being killed. And the retort will be, but we are being killed more than you. That's not a conversation, it's a competition.
But this is, thank you, Aubrey. Well said.
And you're saying to me that we need to have a conversation. However much we might feel entitled to the pedestal of rightness, that the pedestal of rightness only makes you feel like you've won an argument, but it doesn't solve the existential problem.
But it's a hollow victory.
And you are saying that what we need is a conversation that isn't about winning or losing, at least from a partisan point of view, but giving the chance of humanity to win. How do we disrupt these patterns of thinking that pull us into these one-upmanship contestations?
Is to recognize the grief. Is to recognize just the burden that African women carry, that women in general carry, but also to recognize the guilt that some of the perpetrators carry. And is to not deny the humanity of each. Both the perpetrator and the victim are human beings. And when we call out, I coined that moralising without empathising, because you're probably right to call out a racist. But if that's where the conversation ends, for me, I think we've lost an opportunity to build a bridge towards humanity. I will also say this, probably, that there are instances where some people seem so hell-bent on these behaviors that hurt other people, that just like COVID, they've got to be quarantined. But I think the majority of human beings are really just trying to get by. We will not know unless and until we sit and open ourselves up. The difficulty is, are we ready to embrace that vulnerability? Are you really able to sit with somebody who is a horrible perpetrator and says, I'm not excusing my behavior. I see the damage I have done, but can you help me see better? Can you help me to a better place?
Do you think that grace is still available to us?
It's always there. We never run out of grace. We never run out. We have more grace. The thing about being a human, Bro Aubrey, is sooner or later, when you're committed, you recognize that your true limits are way beyond what you set for yourself.
We started off, as we come to a close, by looking at the lion in the savannah. Then we moved to the woman who is abused by her husband, her man. Then we moved to all sorts of current affairs issues that are taking place, prejudice, Gaza, all of these things that have become current affairs issues. They've even become currency of how we are able to gain mind share and followers, how we cancel people, how we do all of these kinds of things. And it has created a world where we don't behave on the basis of a rationality that wants to lift humanity. We are in a transactive relationship all the time. And it sounds to me, Doc, like you're saying to me, that we can still press the reset button where the transaction is of grace.
But Aubrey, if we remember nothing else from our conversation, is exactly that. Is because the social injustices are a creation of human beings, it takes human beings to sort it out. So everybody, probably, when we're going through a loss, it's obvious to see the pain. The people that grow beyond that is, hey, pain, to what are all the profits of your presence? How am I going to be better from this? What it requires is to acknowledge the harm, the hurt that you're feeling, right? But to then see the humanity in the other person. Because if we take Whiteism, everybody is a victim of Whiteism, regardless of the color of our skin. If we do that, then we're going to be able to sit with people from all different walks of life, Bro Aubrey, and say, what can I learn from you? Let me see you, let me hear you. We'll then create social spaces, we'll then create conversations that when we are done with them, Bro Aubrey, we walk away feeling grown up as opposed to feeling grown down.
I want to ask you a practical question as we close. A young guy spent 10 years in jail because a young girl had falsely accused him of rape. The young girl comes with one of these podcast groups that go to people and say, oh, and again, I don't like that. I don't like the idea that people are using people's pain for
the commercial benefit,
for the commercialization, the grotesque dramatization of it all. But anyway, I'm watching this thing, and this young lady who happens, I suppose, to be the reporter in that particular scenario, goes up to this young man and says, I have somebody here who wants to say, I'm sorry. The guy says, sorry for what? It turns out it's this young girl who accused him falsely of rape when he went to jail for 10 years. And at first he's offended by the spectacle of it all, the cameras and so forth. And then he gives them a hearing. And after some time he says, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. And I also understood that because I could understand how he might have been offended by the dramatization of it all, right? And what may seem to be a lack of sincerity, maybe on the part of those that were the broadcasters of this whole thing. But I looked at the young girl who was looking for absolution and forgiveness, dejected because she's rejected. How can we authentically make those people find grace? If that were the model of all conflict at any level, Gaza and Israel, Ukraine, Russia, America, Iran, racism in South Africa, GBV. What is the authentic, genuine way that we resolve all of these things without feeling like there's no justice? In other words, I'm looking for conflict resolution that isn't just theatrical, but that also has the sense of justice in it. Talk to me about that.
So, I mean, if we stick with the facts of this one for a minute, there may be a few reasons why they just did not end well, right? The context is important. As you point out, this gentleman might feel, but they're making light of something that's absolutely important. On the other hand, the young lady might have run out of options. She might have exhausted all options to get hold of this gentleman. In a different setting that honors both of them, there is room for them to sit and work through this. It's going to require, on both sides, to see the humanity of each, both the offender and the victim. But even before they come together, probably, there is an opportunity for professionals, whether they be coaches, they be therapists, to work with each of them. Because suddenly when this lady realizes, I have implicated this guy terribly, mistakenly. I mean, I've made a huge disservice to this guy. I mean, he'll never get back his years, right? I mean, there she's reflected. And we can berate her for, why did you lie? Why did you take so many years? Well, we're here now, right? As for the gentleman, we have to find what is his definition of social justice, because that's what matters most for him. One of them might just be a genuine apology. However, his is a genuine apology. Or it may be monetary compensation, or it may, whatever it is, we've got to understand what would honor him and try and avail that to him as a society. But using this example, Brother Aubrey, your question is, how do we use this as a model? And I think in one word, it's just seeing the humanity of each of these people. Sometimes we make the mistake when we talk about a conflict. So let's take this issue of rape. That maybe, let's say that the rape was true. If we start talking about the perpetrator and saying that the perpetrator might have himself been a victim, people say, but why would you start with the perpetrator and not start with the victim? As though what you're saying is, but these are not competing narratives. Each of them can be dealt with as a case that has merits by itself. So it shouldn't really matter. But I think when people consume, we get a sense that if you start with the victim, then you're elevating the conversation. Well, actually, you're going to have both conversations. The invitation here, Brother Aubrey, is people are not the sum total of their mistakes. And if we can understand where people come from, have that cognitive resonance, and recognize that all of us are a product of the system, that unless we change the system, we are going to be far from solving the situations. If we don't have more women in business leadership, if we don't have more women, if we don't have more disabled people as architects, we are not going to provide an environment that is inclusive. We'll simply perpetuate injustice.
Dr. Matlhgonolo Malebane, given me a lot to think about. I thank you very much for a very challenging conversation. And I hope that our viewers and our listeners will be as edified by this conversation as I have been. Thank you.
Robbie, thank you very much for the invitation. As I started, I've had as much fun learning as I had just having this relaxed conversation. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Join us once again next time for another conversation on Unfiltered with Aubrey Masango.